After the private meeting with the judges, Linda and Maya were taken to a small waiting area while the judges prepared to announce the results. Linda sat down on a cushioned bench, still processing everything that had just happened. Maya sat beside her, swinging her legs back and forth, humming quietly. A reporter from a local music magazine had been covering the competition. Her name was Jennifer, and she had been attending these events for years, writing profiles on promising young musicians. She had watched Maya's performance from the press section and knew immediately this was going to be the story of the year. Jennifer approached them carefully, introducing herself and asking if they would be willing to chat for a few minutes. Linda looked hesitant at first, but Jennifer seemed kind and genuinely interested rather than pushy. "I promise, just a few questions," Jennifer said with a warm smile. "I think people are going to want to know Maya's story. Better they hear it accurately from you than make things up, right?" Linda nodded, realizing the woman had a point. "Okay, but please be gentle. This is all very new for us." Jennifer pulled out her notebook and sat across from them. "So, Maya, how long have you been playing piano?" Maya thought for a moment, counting on her fingers. 4 years. I started when I was 4. "And did you come from a musical family? Are your parents musicians?" Linda laughed at that. "No, not at all. I work at the public library, and my husband runs a small grocery store. Neither of us can carry a tune to save our lives. We don't even own any musical instruments, or we didn't until Maya started playing." Jennifer leaned forward, intrigued. "So how did you discover Maya's talent?" Linda's expression softened as she remembered. "It was the strangest thing. Maya was 4 years old, just a normal little kid. We were visiting my mother-in-law, and she has this old upright piano in her living room. Nobody in the family plays it. It's just there because it belonged to my husband's grandfather. I heard it on TV," Maya interjected. "There was a commercial with piano music, and I really liked it." "Right," Linda continued. "So we're at Grandma's house, and Maya climbs up onto the piano bench. I wasn't really paying attention at first. I thought she was just going to bang on the keys like kids do, you know?" Jennifer nodded, scribbling notes. "But then I heard actual music," Linda said, her voice filled with the same wonder she had felt that day. "I came into the room and Maya was playing the melody from that commercial. Not just random notes, but the actual melody with both hands in the right rhythm. I thought maybe she had taken lessons without me knowing somehow. It sounds crazy, but I couldn't explain what I was hearing. It wasn't that hard," Maya said. "The melody was pretty simple. Once you hear where the notes go, you just put your fingers there." Jennifer smiled at Maya. "You make it sound so easy. What happened after that?" Linda took over again. "Well, I called my husband, completely freaking out. We played other songs for her, different kinds of music. She could play back anything she heard after listening to it once or twice. We didn't know what to do. We couldn't afford fancy music lessons, but we knew this wasn't normal. We found a local piano teacher who offered to give Maya lessons for a reduced rate," Linda continued. "She was a sweet older woman who taught kids in her home, but after 3 lessons she called me and said she couldn't teach Maya anymore." Jennifer's eyebrows raised. "She quit?" "Not in a bad way," Linda explained. "She said that Maya already understood things that she normally spent years teaching students. She said Maya would correct her sometimes during lessons, pointing out better fingerings or suggesting different interpretations. The teacher said Maya needed someone more advanced, someone who really understood music theory and composition. But we couldn't afford those kinds of teachers," Linda said, sighing. "The top piano instructors in our city charge hundreds of dollars per hour. So we did what we could. We bought a used digital piano on payment plans. We got Maya books from the library where I work. She watched videos online, studied sheet music, and just practiced constantly." "How much does Maya practice?" Jennifer asked. "About 2 hours a day," Maya answered. "Sometimes more if I'm working on something really interesting. But Mom makes me stop and do other things too, like homework and playing outside." Linda nodded. "We try to keep things balanced. She's still a kid. She needs to have a childhood, not just practice piano all day." Jennifer looked at Maya thoughtfully. "Do you ever get frustrated when you're learning a new piece? Does anything ever feel too difficult?" Maya tilted her head, considering the question. "Sometimes the stretches are hard because my hands are small. Some pieces want you to reach really far across the keys, and I can't always do that yet. But the music itself isn't hard. It's like a puzzle, and I'm good at puzzles." "What about other subjects in school?" Jennifer asked. "Are you a good student?" "She's excellent," Linda said proudly. "Straight A's. Her teachers say she's especially good at math and reading. She finished the Harry Potter series when she was 6. Math and music are connected, Maya explained seriously. They both have patterns. Music is just math that you can hear. Jennifer was fascinated. She had interviewed many young musicians over the years, but Maya was different. Most prodigies she met were intense, driven by ambitious parents who pushed them hard. But Maya seemed relaxed, almost casual about her extraordinary ability. And Linda clearly wasn't a pushy stage mom. She seemed more bewildered by her daughter's talent than anything else. Has Maya been tested? Jennifer asked carefully. I mean by psychologists or educators? Linda nodded. Yes, last year. The school recommended it because Maya was bored in class. They said she needed more challenging work. She was tested by a child psychologist who specializes in gifted children. What did they say? They used a lot of big words, Linda said with a slight smile. But basically, they said Maya has what they call an exceptional working memory, especially for auditory information. She can remember complex patterns of sounds after hearing them once. They also said she has something called perfect pitch, which means she can identify any musical note just by hearing it. Do you know what key we're in right now? Jennifer asked Maya curiously, gesturing around the room where various sounds filtered in from the auditorium. Maya listened for a moment. The air conditioning hum is a B-flat. Someone's phone just vibrated and that was more like an F-sharp. Jennifer blinked in surprise. She glanced at Linda, who just shrugged as if to say, see what I mean? The psychologist said something else too, Linda continued. She said that Maya doesn't just memorize music. She understands it on a structural level. She sees how all the pieces fit together, how harmonies work, how melodies develop. Most musicians have to learn that through years of study. For Maya, it's intuitive. It's like how you understand sentences, Maya tried to explain. When someone talks to you, you don't think about the grammar rules. You just understand what they're saying, because your brain knows how language works. That's how music is for me. I don't have to think about the theory. I just understand it. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, writing rapidly in her notebook. This is an incredible story. Maya, do you want to be a professional pianist when you grow up? Maya's face lit up. Yes. I want to play concerts all over the world. And I want to compose music too. I have lots of ideas for pieces I want to write. Do you ever feel pressure? Like people expect too much from you? Maya thought about that. Sometimes people look at me funny when they find out how old I am. Like they don't believe me, but I don't really think about what other people expect. I just like playing. Linda squeezed her daughter's hand. We try to keep things in perspective. Yes, Maya has an amazing gift, but she's also just a little girl who likes cartoons and playing with her friends and eating ice cream. We don't want the music to take over her whole life. Though she does play piano a lot, Maya added with a grin. Because I want to, Jennifer smiled. Last question. Maya, what was going through your mind when you were playing today? Were you nervous? Not really, Maya said honestly. When I play, I don't really think about being on a stage or people watching. I just think about the music. It's like the piano and I are having a conversation. I'm telling a story with the notes. And what story were you telling today with the Rachmaninoff? Maya's expression became thoughtful, more mature than her years. Rachmaninoff wrote that piece when he was sad and trying to feel better. The music is about struggling but not giving up. It's about finding beauty even when things are hard. So I tried to play it in a way that showed both the struggle and the hope. Jennifer felt goosebumps on her arms. This 8-year-old was talking about music with more insight than many adult musicians she had interviewed. Before she could ask anything else, a stagehand appeared at the door. Mrs. Chen, Maya, they're about to announce the results. You need to come back to the auditorium. Linda stood up, smoothing down her dress nervously. Maya hopped off the bench, ready to go. Thank you so much for talking with me, Jennifer said sincerely. Good luck out there, though I have a feeling you won't need it. As they walked back toward the auditorium, Linda leaned down and whispered to Maya, How do you feel, sweetheart? Happy, Maya said simply. I got to play piano for lots of people today. That's my favorite thing. The auditorium erupted into applause, but it wasn't the simple, unified celebration that usually followed competition announcements. The sound was complicated, mixed with confusion, excitement, and in some corners, disapproval. Many people leaped to their feet, clapping enthusiastically. These were the ones who had witnessed Maya's performance and understood what they had seen. They were celebrating not just a winner, But an extraordinary moment in music history. But others remained seated, clapping politely but with tight expressions on their faces. These were mostly parents of older contestants who had worked for years preparing for this competition. They watched as an 8-year-old girl walked onto the stage to accept the first-place trophy that their teenagers had dreamed about winning. Maya walked to the center of the stage, and Professor Williams handed her the large trophy. It was almost as big as Maya herself. She had to hold it with both hands, and even then, it looked like it might topple over at any moment. "Congratulations, Maya," Professor Williams said warmly, speaking into the microphone so everyone could hear. "You delivered a performance that none of us will ever forget." Maya smiled shyly into the microphone. "Thank you. I really enjoyed playing today." The simplicity of her response somehow made it even more powerful. She wasn't boastful or overly confident. She was just a kid who loved playing piano and had gotten to do what she loved in front of an audience. As Maya walked off the stage with her trophy, the second and third place winners were announced. Both were talented teenagers who had delivered solid, impressive performances. They received their certificates and smaller trophies with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. It was hard to feel celebrated when everyone in the room knew that one performance had overshadowed all the others. After the ceremony ended and the audience began to disperse, Linda and Maya found themselves surrounded by people. Some wanted to congratulate Maya, asking for photos and autographs. Others wanted to introduce themselves, offering business cards for music schools, managers, and recording studios. Linda felt overwhelmed. She held Maya close, trying to navigate through the crowd politely but firmly. This was exactly what Professor Williams had warned them about. Everything was changing so fast. A well-dressed woman pushed through the crowd. "Mrs. Chen, I'm from the Wellington Academy of Music. We'd like to offer Maya a full scholarship. We specialize in gifted young musicians and we have—" "Not right now, please," Linda said, her voice strained. "We need some time to process everything." But the offers kept coming. A man from a recording company, a talent agent, a documentary filmmaker who wanted to follow Maya's journey. Everyone wanted a piece of this 8-year-old prodigy. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the auditorium, a different kind of conversation was happening. Several parents of older contestants had gathered together, their voices low but intense. "This is ridiculous," one father said angrily. "My son practiced 8 hours a day for 6 months. He worked with one of the best teachers in the state, and he loses to an 8-year-old? A mother nodded in agreement. "It's not fair to the older kids. She's cute and small, and the judges were obviously swayed by that. There's no way she was actually better than some of these teenagers who have been training their whole lives." Another parent, a woman whose daughter had placed 4th, shook her head. "I was there. I heard her play. She was incredible. I don't want to admit it because my daughter is devastated, but that little girl earned that trophy." "But she's 8, the father protested. 8-year-olds shouldn't be competing against 17-year-olds. There should be age categories. This whole thing was a mistake." The teenager who had performed the same Rachmaninoff piece before Maya stood nearby, listening to these conversations. His name was Kevin, and he was 16 years old. He had been playing piano since he was 5. He had won regional competitions. His teacher had told him he had real potential for a career in music, and then Maya had walked onto that stage and made him feel like a beginner. His father came over, putting a hand on his shoulder. "You okay, son?" Kevin nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm okay." "Those judges were out of their minds," his father said quietly. "Your performance was excellent. You deserved better than what you got." But Kevin shook his head. "Dad, she was better than me." "A lot better. I don't want to admit it, but it's true. I've been working on that piece for 8 months, and she played it better than I ever could." His father looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. "I don't know if I want to continue competing," Kevin said quietly. "What's the point if there are people out there who can do in a week what takes me months or years?" Nearby, Professor Williams was having a similar conversation with another judge. They had retreated to the judge's room to escape the chaos in the auditorium. "Some of those parents are very upset," Mr. Peterson said, loosening his tie. "I overheard some pretty harsh comments about our decision." Professor Williams sighed, rubbing her temples. "I expected this. People don't like it when their expectations are challenged. They want competitions to be predictable, to follow the patterns they understand. Do you think we made the right call? Rachel asked. She was the youngest judge and seemed shaken by the negative reactions. Professor Williams looked at her firmly. Do you think we made the wrong call? Did you see anything in Maya's performance that deserved less than a perfect score? Rachel shook her head slowly. No, she was flawless. But I feel terrible for those older kids who worked so hard. I do too, Professor Williams admitted. But our job isn't to reward effort. Our job is to recognize excellence. And we saw excellence today. Undeniable, extraordinary excellence. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where families were leaving. I've been thinking about something. You know how long I worked on that Rachmaninoff piece when I was in my 20s? The other judges waited for her to continue. 6 months. 6 months of intensive practice. I had a world-class teacher. I had access to the best practice facilities. I had technical skill that had been built over 18 years of playing. And it still took me 6 months to get that piece performance ready. She turned back to face them. Maya learned it in 6 days, 6 days. Do you understand how impossible that should be? Do you understand what that means? Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. It means we witnessed something genuinely rare. Once in a generation rare. Exactly, Professor Williams said. I've been judging competitions and attending concerts for 40 years. I've heard hundreds of talented pianists. Some were very good. Some were excellent. But I can count on one hand the number of times I've heard something that made me question everything I thought I knew about music and ability. She paused, her voice becoming softer. Today was one of those times, and if we had let politics or optics or concern about hurt feelings prevent us from recognizing that, we would have failed in our duty as judges. We would have failed Maya and we would have failed the truth. Rachel was quiet for a moment, then nodded. You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard to see those other kids so disappointed. It is hard, Professor Williams agreed, and some of them will quit because of this. They'll decide that if they can't compete with someone like Maya, there's no point in trying, and that breaks my heart. But others will be inspired, Mr. Peterson added. They'll see what's possible and work even harder to reach higher. That's the nature of competitions. They reveal hierarchies, and that's uncomfortable, but it also pushes people to grow. Professor Williams thought about Kevin, the boy who had struggled through the Rachmaninoff before Maya's performance. She had seen him in the audience, seen the look on his face. She wondered if he would quit or if this would motivate him to work harder. We need to make a statement, she said decisively. Something for the press. If we don't control the narrative, other people will. And I want to make sure people understand why we made this decision. She sat down and started writing notes. We'll emphasize the objective criteria we used. We'll explain that age is not a factor in judging. We'll make it clear that Maya's performance met every standard of excellence we've established over 30 years of running this competition. Should we mention the 6 days? Rachel asked. The fact that she learned it so quickly. Professor Williams considered this. No, that might sound like we're bragging or exaggerating. Let's stick to what happened on that stage today. The performance speaks for itself. Over the next hour, they crafted a careful statement. They knew it wouldn't satisfy everyone. People who were determined to be upset would remain upset, but at least they would have their position clearly stated. As they finished, there was a knock on the door. It was Jennifer, the reporter who had interviewed Linda and Maya earlier. Professor Williams, I'm sorry to bother you, but could I get a quote from you about today's results? I'm writing an article for Musical Prodigy magazine. Professor Williams gestured for her to come in. Actually, we've just prepared a statement, but I'll tell you something off the record first. Jennifer pulled out her notebook, marking clearly which part was off the record. I've devoted my entire life to music, Professor Williams began. I've studied it, performed it, taught it, judged it. I thought I understood the limits of human ability. I thought I knew what was possible with enough practice and dedication. Professor Williams looked around the table at her fellow judges. Each one of them had witnessed something extraordinary today, and she could see it in their faces. The mixture of awe and disbelief hadn't faded. I know what some people will say, she continued. They'll say we're being biased because she's young and cute. They'll say we're caught up in the novelty of it all. But let me tell you something about that performance. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The other judges waited, listening intently. I was 22 years old when I first attempted that Rachmaninoff piece. 22, and I had been playing piano since I was 4. That's 18 years of experience. I had studied at one of the best music conservatories in the country. I had won competitions. I had performed in concerts, and that piece nearly broke me. Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. I know what you mean. I attempted it when I was 25 and gave up after 3 months. Some pieces are just beyond certain people. Exactly, Professor Williams said. But here's the thing. It's not just that she played it. It's how she played it. Do you all remember the cadenza section? The part where both hands have to move independently at high speed? All the judges nodded. That section was legendary among pianists for being nearly impossible to master. I spent 6 months on that section alone. 6 months of daily practice working with my teacher, breaking it down measure by measure. And even now, 40 years later, if I tried to play it, I would need to practice for weeks to get it back. But that child walked onto the stage and played it like she was playing a simple scale exercise. The youngest judge, a woman named Rachel who taught at a music academy, spoke up. I noticed something else. She wasn't just executing the notes. She was listening to herself play. You could see it in her face. Most performers, especially in competitions, they're so focused on getting the notes right that they forget to actually hear the music. But she was experiencing it as she played, and the dynamics, another judge added. The way she controlled the volume, moving from soft to loud and back again. That takes incredible control and understanding. Most young players just play everything at the same volume. But she was shaping phrases, creating emotional arcs within the music. Professor Williams leaned back in her chair. Then there's the improvisation. Can we talk about that for a moment? The room fell silent. The improvisation had been the most shocking part for all of them. I have a doctorate in music composition, Professor Williams said. I've studied music theory for decades. The variation she created on the spot incorporated elements of jazz harmony, modern classical techniques, and stayed true to Rachmaninoff's original themes. That's not something you stumble into by accident. That requires deep understanding of how music works. Mr. Peterson shook his head in amazement. When she brought back the original theme at the end, but in a different harmonic context, I actually gasped. That's a sophisticated compositional technique. Graduate students struggle with that concept. So here's my question for all of you, Professor Williams said, looking at each judge in turn. Setting aside her age, setting aside everything except the performance itself, did anyone here see anything that deserved less than a perfect score? One by one, the judges shook their heads. Then we're in agreement, Professor Williams said firmly. Maya Chen wins first place. Rachel raised her hand slightly, looking concerned. I agree with the decision, but I want to voice something. We need to be careful about how we present this. That little girl is about to have her life turned upside down. The media will swarm her. Everyone will want a piece of her. We have a responsibility to think about her well-being. Professor Williams nodded seriously. You're absolutely right. Which is why I want to speak with her and her mother privately before we make the announcement. I want to make sure they understand what's coming and offer some guidance. The other judges agreed. They had all seen child prodigies before. Some handled the pressure well. Others crumbled under the weight of expectations. Maya seemed remarkably grounded for her age, but she was still just a child. There's one more thing, Mr. Peterson said. We should expect some pushback from other parents and competitors. Some people won't understand. They'll see an 8-year-old beating their teenager and feel it's unfair. Then we need to be clear in our statement, Professor Williams replied. We're not judging potential. We're not judging age categories. We're judging performance, and that was objectively the finest performance of the day. Period. The judges spent a few more minutes discussing the other placements. Second place went to a 17-year-old who had played a beautiful Chopin piece. Third place to a 15-year-old who had performed a challenging Liszt composition. The rankings were fairly straightforward after that, but everyone knew that those rankings wouldn't matter much. Maya's performance had overshadowed everything else. She was the story everyone would remember. Professor Williams stood up. All right, let's bring Maya and her mother in. I want to talk to them before the announcement. A stagehand was sent to fetch them. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Linda entered first, holding Maya's hand. Both of them looked nervous. Maya's eyes were wide as she looked around at all the judges sitting at the big table. Please sit down, Professor Williams said warmly, gesturing to 2 chairs. You're not in any trouble. We just wanted to talk to you both before we announce the results. Linda and Maya sat down. Linda was gripping her daughter's hand tightly. Professor Williams smiled at Maya. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Good, Maya said quietly. A little tired. My hands hurt a bit. I imagine they do. That's a lot of playing you did up there. Can I ask you something? How long have you been working on that Rachmaninoff piece? Maya thought for a moment. About a week, I think. The judges glanced at each other. Linda jumped in quickly. She means she's been working on that specific performance for about a week. She's heard the piece before, of course, and she's played parts of it during her practice sessions over the past few months. But Maya shook her head. No, Mom, I started learning it last Tuesday. I heard it on YouTube and wanted to try it. The room went completely silent. Professor Williams felt her throat go dry. Last Tuesday, she repeated slowly. As in 6 days ago? Maya nodded. Yeah, it took me a couple days to get it right. The fingering in the cadenza was tricky at first. Linda looked as shocked as the judges. Maya, honey, why didn't you tell me you only started learning it last week? I thought you'd been practicing it for months. You didn't ask, Maya said simply. And I did practice it. Just not for months. I practiced it a lot over the last week, though. Mr. Peterson leaned forward. Maya, when you say you heard it on YouTube, do you mean you learned it by ear? Without sheet music? Oh, I looked at the sheet music too, Maya explained. But I mostly learned it by listening. Sheet music is helpful for remembering the details. But listening helps you understand what the music is supposed to feel like. Professor Williams had to sit back in her chair. 6 days. This child had mastered one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written in 6 days. She had spent 6 months on it herself at age 22 with professional instruction and daily practice. Maya, Professor Williams said gently, do you understand that what you did today was very special? That most people can't do what you just did? Maya looked down at her hands, suddenly shy. I guess. People tell me that sometimes. But it doesn't feel special to me. Playing piano just makes sense. It's like when you read a book, and the words just make sentences in your head automatically. That's how music is for me. The notes just go together in ways that make sense. Rachel, the youngest judge, spoke up. Can you tell us about the variation you created? How did you come up with that? Maya's face brightened. She loved talking about music. Well, Rachmaninoff's theme has this really pretty melody in it, right? And I was thinking about how jazz musicians take melodies and change them, make them different but still recognizable. So I thought, what if I did that? What if I took his melody but put it in different chords, different rhythms? But you created that improvisation on the spot? Rachel pressed. You didn't plan it out beforehand? I had some ideas, Maya admitted. But I didn't practice it exactly. I knew kind of what direction I wanted to go, and then I just followed where the music wanted to go. Does that make sense? It made sense to the judges because they were all trained musicians who understood improvisation. But the level of sophistication Maya had demonstrated was far beyond what any of them could do spontaneously. Professor Williams took a deep breath. Maya, Linda, I need to tell you something. We've made our decision about the competition results. Maya, you received perfect scores from all 5 judges. You're going to win first place. Maya's eyes went wide. Linda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But before we announce that, Professor Williams continued, I need you both to understand what's going to happen next. This is going to be big news. People are going to want to interview Maya, film her playing, write articles about her. Your lives are going to change significantly. Linda was crying again, but she was nodding. We understand. I want to offer you my personal mentorship, Professor Williams said, looking directly at Maya. I don't usually take on private students anymore, but what? Maya walked off the stage to thunderous applause that seemed like it would never end. Her mother rushed to meet her in the wings, dropping to her knees and wrapping her daughter in a tight hug. Linda was crying so hard she couldn't speak. She just held Maya close, feeling her daughter's small heart beating rapidly against her chest. Mom, I can't breathe, Maya said with a little laugh, and Linda loosened her grip, pulling back to look at her daughter's face. You were amazing, sweetheart. Just amazing, Linda managed to say through her tears. Maya smiled, but she already seemed to be thinking about something else. I think I rushed the transition to the variation a bit. Next time I'll make it smoother. Linda laughed and cried at the same time. Her daughter had just delivered what might have been the performance of the evening, and she was already thinking about how to improve it. That was so typical of Maya. Out in the auditorium, the audience was still buzzing. Parents were talking excitedly to each other, comparing what they had just seen to famous performances they had watched online. Some were already pulling out their phones, checking if anyone had recorded it. But down in the front row, the judges sat in stunned silence. They had scoring sheets in front of them, but none of them had written anything. How do you score something like that? What numbers do you assign to what they had just witnessed? Professor Williams finally picked up her pen. Her hand was still shaking slightly. She looked down at the scoring categories: technical execution, musical interpretation, stage presence, overall impression. Each category was scored out of 10 points. She had been judging competitions for 30 years. She had developed a keen sense of what deserved an 8, what deserved a 9, and what deserved a perfect 10. A perfect 10 was extremely rare. In all her years of judging, she had probably given out fewer than 20 perfect scores across all categories combined. She clicked her pen and started writing. Technical execution 10. There was no other possible score. Maya had played one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire without a single mistake. Not one missed note, not one rhythm error, not one moment of hesitation. Musical interpretation 10. The child hadn't just played the notes. She had understood them, felt them, communicated them to the audience in a way that moved people to tears. Stage presence 10. Despite her young age and small size, Maya had commanded that stage completely. Everyone in the room had been focused on her, mesmerized by her performance. Overall impression 10. Professor Williams paused here, her pen hovering over the paper. She thought about all the performances she had seen in her long career. She thought about concerts she had attended at Carnegie Hall, at the Royal Albert Hall in London, at the Berliner Philharmonie. She thought about recordings she owned of the greatest pianists of the 20th century. What Maya had just done belonged in that conversation. It wasn't just good for an 8-year-old. It wasn't even just good for a professional pianist. It was exceptional by any standard, at any age, anywhere in the world. She wrote down the 10 and set her pen down. Perfect score. 40 out of 40 points. The judge next to her, a man named Mr. Peterson, who had been teaching piano at a prestigious university for 25 years, leaned over to look at her scoring sheet. His eyebrows shot up. "You gave her all 10s?" he whispered. Professor Williams met his eyes. "Did she deserve anything less?" Mr. Peterson looked down at his own sheet. He had been trying to find something, anything, to critique. That's what judges did. They found the small imperfections, the areas where a performer could improve. But he couldn't find anything. He slowly wrote down his own scores. 4 10s. The third judge, a woman who had once been a concert pianist herself before a hand injury ended her performing career, was crying quietly as she filled out her sheet. She had spent years trying to achieve what this little girl seemed to do effortlessly. The unfairness of it stung, but more than that, she felt privileged to have witnessed it. 4 more 10s. The fourth and fifth judges looked at each other. They were younger than the others, both in their 30s, both still active performers. They had competed in these same competitions when they were teenagers. They knew how hard everyone worked, how many hours of practice went into preparing for these performances. "We can't give a perfect score to an 8-year-old, one of them whispered. "Think about the message that sends to all the other kids." The other one shook his head. "We're not judging age. We're judging performance." And that performance was perfect. More 10s were written down. Backstage, the competition continued. Other performers took the stage playing their prepared pieces. Some played well. A few played very well. But everyone knew nothing could follow what they had just witnessed. It was like watching fireworks after the grand finale. Still pretty, but the moment had passed. The teenage boy who had performed before Maya sat in a corner, his head in his hands. His father sat next to him, unsure of what to say. The boy had worked so hard. They had paid for expensive lessons, invested in a quality piano for their home, sacrificed family vacations so the boy could attend music camps during the summer, and then a little girl half his age had come along and made it all look easy. "I want to quit," the boy said quietly. His father squeezed his shoulder. "Don't say that. You played well. I played terribly. You hurt her. Everyone hurt her. What's the point of even trying?" It was a conversation happening in several corners of the backstage area, young performers questioning whether they should continue, parents wondering if they had been wasting their time and money, teachers feeling inadequate, wondering what they could possibly teach their students that would make a difference. But in another corner, a different kind of conversation was happening. A group of younger children, maybe 9 and 10 years old, were talking excitedly about Maya's performance. Did you see how fast her fingers moved? That was so cool. I want to learn that piece now. If she can do it, maybe I can too. I'm going to practice extra hard this week. Did you hear how beautiful that sounded? These children weren't discouraged. They were inspired. They had seen what was possible, and instead of feeling defeated, they felt motivated. They wanted to work harder, learn more, reach higher. Maya's mother had taken her to a quiet corner where they could wait for the results. Maya was drinking some water and humming quietly to herself. Linda recognized the tune. It was the variation Maya had just improvised on stage. She was already thinking about it, refining it, imagining how it could be better. Maya, honey, Linda said gently. How did you know you could do that? The improvisation, I mean. We never practiced that. Maya looked up at her mother with those large, intelligent eyes. I don't know, Mom, I just heard it in my head. The notes that came next, they just made sense. Like when you're reading a story and you kind of know what word is coming next. It's like that, but with music. Linda nodded, even though she didn't really understand. She had never experienced anything like what her daughter was describing. Music was just noise to her. Pleasant noise sometimes, but nothing more. To Maya, it was a language she spoke fluently, naturally, without effort. A stagehand approached them. Excuse me, Mrs. Chen? The judges would like to speak with you and Maya after the final performer. In the private judging room, Linda felt her stomach flip. Was Maya in trouble? Had she done something wrong? You weren't supposed to deviate from your prepared piece in competitions. Maybe the judges were upset about the improvisation. Is everything okay? Linda asked nervously. The stagehand smiled warmly. Oh yes, everything's fine. More than fine. The judges just want to talk to you both. It's not a bad thing, I promise. Out in the auditorium, the final performer finished their piece. It was a nice performance, technically solid, musically pleasant. The audience applauded politely. The performer took their bow and left the stage. The head organizer took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending today's competition. The judges will now deliberate to determine the rankings. We'll announce the results in about 30 minutes. Please feel free to stretch your legs, get some refreshments from the lobby. People stood up, talking excitedly. Almost every conversation was about Maya. Parents who had brought their children to compete were telling them about what they had just witnessed. Music teachers were discussing the technical aspects of her performance. A few people were already on their phones trying to find out more about this 8-year-old prodigy. In the judging room, the 5 judges sat around a table. In front of them were all the score sheets from every performer. They started at the top, discussing the first few performers, ranking them against each other. But everyone knew this was just a formality. They all knew who had won. When they got to Maya's score sheets, they laid them out on the table. Perfect scores from all 5 judges. In the 30-year history of this competition, it had never happened before. Not once. We need to talk about this, Professor Williams said quietly. Before we make it official. The other judges nodded. They all understood the weight of what they were about to do. Giving an 8-year-old the top prize over teenagers who had trained for years would make headlines. There would be controversy. Some people would say they were being too lenient, too swayed by the novelty of a child prodigy. Others would accuse them of putting unfair pressure on a young child. Maya's fingers touched the keys and the first notes rang out through the auditorium. Clear. Perfect. Confident. Professor Williams felt her breath catch in her throat. Those opening notes were played with the kind of precision that usually took years to develop. The touch was neither too heavy nor too light. It was exactly right. In the audience, parents who had been whispering to each other fell silent. The other contestants backstage who had been chatting nervously stopped mid-sentence. Everyone was listening now. Maya's small frame seemed to transform as she played. Her back straightened. Her head tilted slightly as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose, dancing from note to note without any hesitation. The piece started relatively simple, but everyone in that room who knew anything about piano knew what was coming. Rachmaninoff didn't give pianists any mercy. His compositions were designed to push the limits of what human hands could do. As the piece progressed, Maya's hands began moving faster. Her right hand played a melody up in the higher notes, while her left hand created a rumbling bass line below. They were doing completely different rhythms, completely different patterns, yet somehow working together to create something beautiful. Professor Williams leaned forward in her chair. She was gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She knew every note of this piece. She had lived with it for months during her own training. She knew exactly how difficult it was. The teenage boy who had just performed this same piece was standing in the wings, watching. His mouth hung open slightly. He had practiced this piece 6 hours a day for 8 months. He had worked with a private instructor who charged $200 an hour. He had played it through hundreds of times and still couldn't get it right. Yet this little girl was sailing through it like it was a simple nursery rhyme. Maya reached the section where the boy had stumbled. It was a passage where both hands had to move in opposite directions, playing incredibly fast notes that jumped across the entire keyboard. Most pianists had to practice this section thousands of times, building up the muscle memory slowly, painfully. The judges held their breath. This was where the boy had fallen apart. This was where most people fell apart. Maya's hands flew across the keys, left hand down to the bass notes, right hand up to the treble, crossing over each other, weaving between each other, never missing a single note. The passage that had taken Professor Williams weeks to learn was executed flawlessly, as if Maya had been playing it her entire life. One of the judges dropped his pen. The small clatter echoed in the silent auditorium, but nobody looked away from the stage. Everyone was mesmerized. Maya's mother stood in the wings, tears streaming down her face. She had seen her daughter play many times, but never in front of an audience like this. Never under pressure like this. She was so proud she could barely breathe. As the piece continued, Maya began adding small embellishments. Little flourishes that weren't in the original score. A tiny trill here, a slight change in dynamics there. She wasn't just playing Rachmaninoff's notes. She was interpreting them, making them her own, adding her own musical voice to the composition. Professor Williams felt something strange happening. Her eyes were getting wet. She never cried during competitions. She had sat through thousands of performances over her career. She had heard brilliant playing before, but this was different. This wasn't just technical skill. This was something else entirely. The child understood the music. Not just the notes, but the emotion behind them. Rachmaninoff wrote this piece when he was struggling with depression, when he was fighting to find his voice again as a composer. There was pain in this music, longing, hope, desperation, and somehow this 8-year-old girl was expressing all of that through her playing. The other audience members were experiencing the same thing. Some were crying. Others sat with their hands pressed to their chests. A few had their eyes closed, just listening, letting the music wash over them. Maya's hands continued their dance. The piece was building to its climax, the most difficult part of all. This was the section that had broken countless pianists, the section that required not just technical skill but physical endurance. Your hands had to move so fast for so long that they began to ache, to cramp, to rebel against you. But Maya showed no signs of strain. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. Her fingers moved with the same confidence they had at the beginning. If anything, she looked like she was enjoying herself. The climax arrived. Notes poured from the piano like a waterfall, cascading over each other, building in intensity and volume. Maya's whole body was involved now. She swayed slightly with the rhythm, her feet working the pedals to create rich, resonant tones that filled every corner of the auditorium. Professor Williams glanced at her fellow judges. They were all staring at the stage with identical expressions of disbelief. One judge's mouth was literally hanging open. Another was shaking his head slowly as if trying to convince himself that what he was seeing was real. Then, just as the audience thought the piece was ending, Maya did something unexpected. Instead of playing the final chords of Rachmaninoff's composition, she transitioned smoothly into something new. And now my own variation, she had said earlier. The judges had barely registered those words. Most 8-year-olds couldn't even spell the word variation, let alone compose one. But Maya had clearly meant it. The music changed, but it still felt connected to Rachmaninoff's themes. She had taken his melodic ideas and twisted them, played with them, reimagined them in a completely different style. She started incorporating jazz harmonies, which shouldn't have worked with a classical Russian composition, but somehow did. The melody wove in and out, sometimes recognizable as Rachmaninoff, sometimes completely original. She added syncopated rhythms that made the music feel modern and fresh. Professor Williams realized with a shock that Maya wasn't reading this from sheet music. She was improvising, creating this variation on the spot in real time, in front of hundreds of people. The technical term for what Maya was doing was developing variation, a compositional technique that took music students years to understand theoretically, let alone execute practically. Yet here was a child doing it as naturally as breathing. The other contestants backstage had stopped thinking about their own performances. They had crowded around the wing watching Maya with wide eyes. Some looked inspired. Others looked defeated. How could you compete with something like this? A teenage girl who had won 3 regional competitions started crying quietly, not because she was sad, but because she had just witnessed something that made her understand how much further music could go, how much more there was to learn and experience. Maya's variation continued for another 2 minutes. She explored different keys, different moods, different textures. At one point, the music became very soft and gentle, almost like a lullaby. Then it built back up to a thunderous finale that used the entire range of the piano. For the ending, she brought back Rachmaninoff's original theme, but played it in a completely different harmonic context. It was like seeing an old friend in a new light. Familiar but transformed, the final chord rang out. Maya held down the pedal, letting the notes sustain and blend together, creating one last moment of rich, complex harmony. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and placed them gently in her lap. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Then the auditorium erupted. People leaped to their feet. The applause was deafening. Some people were cheering. Others were wiping tears from their eyes. The other contestants backstage were clapping so hard their hands hurt. Maya stood up from the piano bench and gave a small, shy bow. Despite the incredible performance she had just given, she looked like any other 8-year-old who had just finished their recital. A little embarrassed by all the attention, a little surprised by the intensity of the reaction, Professor Williams wasn't clapping. She couldn't. Her hands were trembling too much. She just sat there, staring at the small figure on stage, trying to process what she had just witnessed. In 40 years of professional music, she had never seen anything like this. Never. The judge next to her leaned over and whispered, "Did that really just happen?" Professor Williams could only nod. She didn't trust her voice to speak. The backstage area of the National Youth Music Competition was buzzing with nervous energy. Kids of all ages sat on metal chairs, some practicing finger movements in the air, others closing their eyes trying to memorize their pieces one last time. Parents whispered encouraging words while clutching programs tightly in their hands. In the corner, 8-year-old Maya Chen sat perfectly still. Her tiny legs dangled from the chair, not quite reaching the floor. She wore a simple blue dress her mother had picked out that morning, and her long black hair was tied back in a neat ponytail. In her small hands she held sheets of music, though she wasn't really looking at them anymore. She had already memorized every single note. Maya's mother, Linda, sat beside her, occasionally reaching over to smooth down her daughter's hair or adjust her collar. Linda wasn't a musician herself. She worked at a local library, and her husband managed a small grocery store. They were simple, hard-working people who never imagined they'd be sitting backstage at a prestigious national competition. Through the heavy velvet curtains, they could hear someone playing. It was a teenage boy, probably 16 or 17 years old. He was attempting one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Even from backstage, Maya could tell he was struggling. The piece had a section called the cadenza, a part where the pianist plays alone without the orchestra. It's incredibly fast, with notes jumping all over the keyboard. Your left hand and right hand have to do completely different things at the same time, and one tiny mistake can throw off the entire sequence. This boy had clearly practiced for months, maybe even years, but he kept stumbling over the same passages. Maya listened carefully. She could hear exactly where he was going wrong. His left hand was slightly out of sync with his right, and he was rushing the tempo in the difficult parts, probably from nervousness. She understood why. When you're scared of making a mistake, you tend to speed up, trying to get through the hard parts quickly. But that's exactly what makes you mess up. The judges sat in the front row of the auditorium. There were 5 of them, all accomplished musicians with decades of experience. Professor Williams, the head judge, was particularly well known. She had performed in concert halls across Europe and Asia, and had even recorded several albums. Right now, she sat with her arms crossed, a slight frown on her face as she listened to the boy struggle through the piece. She knew this piece intimately. Too intimately, perhaps. When she was in music school, she had spent an entire semester working on this exact concerto. She remembered crying over those same passages, practicing until her fingers ached, feeling like she would never get it right. It took her weeks and weeks of 8-hour practice days to finally master it. And even now, at 62 years old, she still found certain sections challenging. The other judges were making notes on their scoring sheets, occasionally glancing at each other with knowing looks. They had all been there struggling with pieces that seemed impossible. They felt sympathy for the boy, but sympathy doesn't earn high scores in a competition. Finally, the boy played the last note. There was polite applause from the small audience, mostly parents and other contestants. He stood up, bowed awkwardly, and walked off stage with his shoulders slightly slumped. You could tell he knew it hadn't gone well. Professor Williams leaned toward the judge next to her and whispered something. The other judge nodded in agreement. They would give him credit for attempting such a difficult piece, but the execution simply wasn't there. Too many mistakes, too much hesitation in the critical moments. Backstage, a woman with a clipboard appeared. She was the stage manager, keeping everything running on schedule. She looked down at her list and called out in a clear voice that carried through the nervous chatter. Maya Chen, you're up next, sweetheart. Maya stood up, smoothing down her dress. Her mother knelt down in front of her, holding both of her small hands. Remember, just have fun up there, Linda said softly. It doesn't matter what happens. We're proud of you no matter what. Maya nodded and smiled. She wasn't nervous, not really. She never got nervous about playing piano. It was the one place where everything made perfect sense to her, where she felt completely at home. As she walked toward the stage entrance, she could hear the stage manager speaking into her headset. Next up we have Maya Chen, age 8. Yes, 8 years old. There was a pause, then the woman glanced down at Maya with a surprised expression. She had probably just been told that this small child was about to walk onto a stage meant for teenagers and young adults. The curtain pulled back, and bright stage lights flooded Maya's vision. For a moment, she couldn't see anything except the gleaming black grand piano sitting in the center of the stage. It looked enormous under the spotlights, like a sleeping giant. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out the shadowy forms of the judges in the front row and the scattered audience members beyond them. She walked to the piano, her footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden stage floor. When she reached the piano bench, there was an immediate problem. The bench was set for someone much taller. Her feet wouldn't even come close to reaching the pedals, which were essential for playing any serious piece. A stagehand quickly brought out a special extender, a platform that would let her short legs reach the pedals properly. In the audience, she could hear a few chuckles. Not mean ones, just the kind of gentle laughter that comes from seeing something unexpectedly cute. An 8-year-old at a piano built for adults does look a bit funny. Professor Williams looked down at her program. Maya Chen, age 8, performing. Her eyes widened as she read the piece selection. The program had to be wrong. There was no way this child was going to attempt what was listed there, but Maya stood beside the piano, waiting patiently for them to be ready. When the stage was set and everyone had quieted down, she spoke in a clear, small voice that somehow carried through the large auditorium. I'll be performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, third movement cadenza, and then I'll play a variation of my own. There was a moment of complete silence. Then whispers started rippling through the audience. The judges looked at each other with raised eyebrows. This was the same piece that had just defeated a teenage boy who had probably been playing piano since before this little girl was born. Professor Williams leaned forward in her seat. She opened her mouth, about to suggest that perhaps Maya might want to choose something more appropriate for her age and skill level, maybe a nice Mozart sonata or a Chopin waltz, something beautiful but manageable. But before she could say anything, Maya had already adjusted the bench, settled herself in front of the keyboard, and placed her small hands on the keys. Her feet found the pedals. She took one deep breath and the auditorium fell completely silent. Everyone was curious now. Would this child make it through even the first few measures? Or would this be one of those awkward moments where a young performer has to stop and start over, maybe even leave the stage in tears? Professor Williams glanced at the other judges. One of them was already preparing a kind smile, the sort you give when you're about to deliver gentle criticism to a child who has attempted something far beyond their abilities. The stage lights reflected off the piano's polished surface. Maya's hands hovered over the keys for just a moment. Then she began to play. 3 days after the competition, Maya's life had become unrecognizable. The small apartment where she lived with her parents had become a hub of activity. The phone rang constantly.
Emails flooded her mother's inbox.
News vans had even shown up outside their building, hoping to get footage of the child prodigy. Linda had taken time off from work at the library to manage the chaos.
She sat at their small kitchen table, sorting through stacks of business cards, letters, and offers.
Recording contracts, concert invitations, scholarship offers from prestigious music schools across the country, even a few movie producers who wanted to make a documentary about Maya's life. Maya herself seemed remarkably unbothered by all the attention. She sat in their tiny living room, practicing on the digital piano they had bought on payment plans 2 years ago. The instrument was modest, nothing like the grand pianos she had played at the competition, but Maya didn't complain. She was working on a Chopin piece now, her small fingers moving gracefully across the keys. Her father, David, came home from the grocery store early. He looked exhausted. "There were reporters at the store today," he said, slumping into a chair. "Customers were asking me about Maya. I had 3 people request her autograph." Linda looked up from the papers. "I got a call from the school. They want to know if Maya will still be attending. Apparently, some fancy boarding school for gifted kids has offered her a full scholarship." David rubbed his face. "This is all happening so fast. A week ago, we were just a normal family. Now everyone wants a piece of our daughter." In the living room, Maya stopped playing. "I don't want to go to a boarding school," she called out. "I like my school. And I'd miss you guys." Linda felt her heart squeeze. In all the excitement and chaos, they hadn't really stopped to think about what Maya wanted. Everyone was making plans for her, but nobody had asked this 8-year-old girl what she hoped for. "Come here, sweetheart," Linda said, patting the chair next to her. Maya hopped down from the piano bench and came to sit between her parents. She looked so small in the kitchen chair, her feet dangling above the floor. "Maya, honey," Linda began carefully, "a lot of people want to help you with your music. They're offering amazing opportunities. But Daddy and I want to make sure we're doing what's best for you, not just what sounds impressive. What do you want to do?" David asked simply. Maya thought for a moment, swinging her legs back and forth. "I want to keep playing piano. I want to get better. And Professor Williams said she would teach me, right? I liked her. She understands music the way I do. She did offer to mentor you," Linda confirmed. "She called yesterday. She wants to meet with us next week to discuss a plan." "But what about all these other offers?" David asked, gesturing at the piles of papers. "Recording contracts, concert tours, television appearances. Some of these could be really good for your future." Maya scrunched up her nose. "I don't want to be on TV, that sounds boring. I just want to play piano and learn new pieces." Linda and David exchanged glances. Their daughter had just received offers that most musicians would dream about, and she was more interested in simply practicing and learning. "What about school?" Linda asked. "Some of these music academies could give you much better training than what you're getting now." "But what about my friends?" Maya asked, her voice getting smaller. "What about Amanda and Sophie? If I go to a different school, I won't see them anymore." Linda pulled her daughter close. "You're right. Those friendships are important. We don't have to decide everything right now. Let's take it slow and figure out what makes sense for our family." The doorbell rang. David got up to answer it, peering through the peephole first. They had learned to be cautious. Too many reporters and strangers had shown up unannounced. "It's Professor Williams," he said, surprised. He opened the door. Professor Williams stood in the hallway holding a folder and looking apologetic. "I'm so sorry to drop by without calling first. Your phone has been busy all morning, and I wanted to speak with you before anyone else got to you with their offers." "Please come in," Linda said, quickly clearing papers off the couch. Professor Williams entered the small apartment, and Maya immediately brightened. "Professor Williams, do you want to hear the new piece I'm learning?" "I'd love to, but let me talk to your parents first, okay? Then I promise I'll listen to everything you want to play." They all sat down in the cramped living room. Professor Williams looked around at the modest apartment, The old furniture, the small digital piano. This was clearly not a wealthy family chasing fame through their child. These were hard-working people who were overwhelmed by what was happening to them. I imagine you've been flooded with offers, Professor Williams began. That's putting it mildly, David said. We've gotten hundreds of calls. Everyone wants something from Maya. I thought that might be happening, Professor Williams said. That's why I'm here. I want to help you navigate this because it can be dangerous if you're not careful. Linda leaned forward. What do you mean dangerous? I've seen this happen before with young prodigies, Professor Williams explained. Everyone sees dollar signs. Recording companies want to exploit her talent for profit. Concert promoters want to book her for shows without considering whether a child should be performing that schedule. Some schools will promise the world but really just want the prestige of having her name associated with them. She opened her folder and pulled out some papers. I've put together a plan. Not a contract, not an obligation. Just a suggestion for how to develop Maya's gift while protecting her childhood. David and Linda listened intently as Professor Williams outlined her vision. Private lessons twice a week, focused on technique and musical understanding. Gradual exposure to performing, but only in age-appropriate settings. Continued regular schooling with her friends. No recording contracts or commercial appearances until she was older and could make those decisions herself. The goal, Professor Williams said, is to nurture her talent without burning her out. She's 8 years old. She needs to play outside, have friends, watch cartoons, be a kid. Yes, she has an extraordinary gift, but that doesn't mean she should spend every waking moment performing or practicing. How much would these lessons cost? David asked hesitantly. We've looked into private instruction with someone of your caliber before. We can't afford those rates, Professor Williams smiled. I'm not asking for payment. Teaching Maya would be an honor, not a job. I'm at a point in my career where I don't need to take on students for money. I do it because I love music and want to pass on what I know, and Maya is special. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. Linda felt tears welling up. I don't understand. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. Because I know Maya, Professor Williams said simply. I heard her play. I saw her gift. And I've been in the music world long enough to know that gifts like hers are incredibly rare and incredibly fragile. They need to be protected and nurtured carefully. If I can help do that, then I consider it my responsibility. She turned to Maya, who had been listening quietly. Maya, how do you feel about working with me? I'm not an easy teacher. I'll push you to grow and improve, but I promise I'll also make it fun and I'll never ask you to do something that doesn't feel right to you. Maya nodded enthusiastically. I want to learn from you. You understand music the same way I do. When you talked about the Rachmaninoff piece at the competition, you understood why I played it the way I did. Professor Williams smiled warmly. Good, then let's start next week. We'll begin with some foundational technique work, then move into more advanced repertoire. I also want to start teaching you music theory and composition. You have natural instincts for both, but formal training will help you develop those even further. Over the next hour, they discussed logistics. Lessons would be at Professor Williams's private studio twice a week after Maya's regular school. There would be occasional performance opportunities, but nothing too demanding. No media appearances unless Maya specifically wanted to do them, and even then, with careful vetting. What about all these other offers? Linda asked, gesturing to the stacks of papers. Be very selective, Professor Williams advised. Most of them are not in Maya's best interest. They're looking at her as a commodity, not as a child. Some recording contracts lock young artists into agreements that benefit the company far more than the musician. Some performance schedules are exhausting even for adults, let alone children. She pulled out a business card. This is my lawyer. He specializes in representing young musicians. If you get any offers that genuinely interest you, have him review them first. He'll help you understand what you're signing and whether it's actually a good deal. David took the card gratefully. Thank you. We're so out of our depth here. This isn't our world. It wasn't my world either when I first started, Professor Williams said. I made mistakes, signed bad contracts, let people take advantage of me. I don't want that to happen to Maya. Before she left, Professor Williams kept her promise to listen to Maya play. Maya excitedly sat at her digital piano and played the Chopin piece she had been working on. She had only started learning it 2 days ago, but she was already playing it beautifully. Professor Williams listened with her eyes closed, a slight smile on her face. When Maya finished, she opened her eyes. 3 months had passed since the competition that changed everything. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and Maya walked through the gates of the prestigious Harmony Music Institute with her mother. The building was beautiful, with tall windows and walls lined with photographs of famous musicians who had studied there. This was where Professor Williams taught advanced students. The institute was known worldwide for producing exceptional pianists, and normally they only accepted students who were at least 16 years old. Maya, at 8 years old, was about to become their youngest student ever. Linda held Maya's hand as they walked down the corridor. The walls echoed with sounds of various instruments being played in different practice rooms, piano melodies mixed with violin scales and cello warm-ups. It was like walking through a living symphony. "Are you nervous?" Linda asked her daughter. Maya shook her head. "No, excited." They reached Professor Williams' private studio. The door was made of heavy oak with a brass nameplate that read, "Professor A. Williams, Masterclass Studio, Gadesi." "Knock softly. Come in," came Professor Williams' warm voice. They entered a spacious room with high ceilings and excellent acoustics. A magnificent grand piano sat in the center, its black surface gleaming under the soft lights. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in natural light, and the walls were lined with bookshelves full of sheet music and music theory books. Professor Williams stood up from behind a desk, smiling. She looked different here in her own space, more relaxed than she had been at the competition. She wore simple clothes, comfortable and practical for teaching. "Maya." "Right on time. Are you ready for your first real lesson?" Maya nodded eagerly, already moving toward the piano like a magnet drawn to metal. "Mrs. Chen, you're welcome to stay and observe if you'd like," Professor Williams offered. Linda nodded and took a seat in a comfortable chair near the window. She had sat through all of Maya's previous lessons over the past few months, watching her daughter grow and develop under Professor Williams' guidance. "All right, Maya, let's start with some warm-up exercises," Professor Williams said, sitting down next to Maya at the piano bench. "I want to hear your scales today. Let's begin with C major, then we'll move through all the keys." Maya's fingers began moving across the keys, playing scales with precision and fluidity. Professor Williams listened carefully, occasionally stopping her to adjust hand position or suggest a different fingering. "Good, but I want you to think about the quality of each note," Professor Williams instructed. "Don't just play the right notes. Listen to the sound you're creating. Each note should be clear and even, like pearls on a string." Maya tried again, this time focusing more on the tone and evenness. The difference was subtle but noticeable. "Better," Professor Williams said with approval. "This is what I want you to understand, Maya. Technical skill is important, but music is about sound and feeling. Anyone can learn to play the right notes with enough practice, but making beautiful music requires listening, thinking, feeling." They moved through various exercises, working on finger independence, hand coordination, and dynamic control. Professor Williams was patient but demanding, praising Maya when she did well and gently correcting when something needed improvement. After about 30 minutes of technical work, Professor Williams pulled out some sheet music. "Now let's look at something new. Have you heard of Claude Debussy?" Maya's face lit up. "Yes, I've heard some of his pieces online. They sound like water and light." Professor Williams smiled at the description. "That's a beautiful way to put it." Debussy was an impressionist composer. His music creates moods and images rather than telling specific stories. "I want to introduce you to one of his preludes." She placed the music on the piano. It looked complex, with unusual harmonies and rhythm patterns that didn't follow traditional rules. "This is going to challenge you in different ways than Rachmaninoff did," Professor Williams explained. "This isn't about speed or power. This is about color and texture. Every note has a purpose, creating a specific atmosphere." Maya studied the music carefully, her eyes moving across the page. Professor Williams watched her, fascinated as always by how quickly Maya absorbed information. "Can I try it?" Maya asked after a minute of studying. "Go ahead. Just sight read it first. Don't worry about getting everything perfect." Maya placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The music was indeed different from anything she had played before. It was dreamy and floating, with harmonies that didn't resolve in expected ways. She stumbled a few times, the unusual rhythms tripping her up. Professor Williams let her play through the entire piece without interruption. When Maya finished, she looked up expectantly. What did you think? Professor Williams asked. It's strange, Maya said honestly. But I like it. It feels like being underwater or like watching clouds move. Exactly. Now let me show you something about how Debussy thought about music. Professor Williams sat down at the piano and played a passage, demonstrating how the harmonies worked. See how these chords don't follow the traditional rules we're taught? Debussy was breaking the rules on purpose, creating new sounds. Maya listened intently, her mind absorbing the concepts. So the rules aren't really rules? They're more like suggestions? Professor Williams laughed. In a way, yes. You need to know the rules first, understand why they exist. But then once you truly understand them, you can break them intelligently to create something new. That's what great composers do. They spent the next hour working through the Debussy piece measure by measure. Professor Williams explained the historical context, the harmonic innovations, the way Debussy used the piano to create impressionistic sound paintings. Maya soaked it all up like a sponge, asking thoughtful questions and making connections that surprised even Professor Williams. You know what amazes me about you? Professor Williams said during a break. Most students learn music sequentially. First technique, then reading, then interpretation, then theory. But you seem to understand all of it simultaneously. Your mind makes connections instantly. Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. It's like everything is connected. The technique affects the sound. The sound creates the feeling. The feeling comes from understanding what the composer wanted. It's all one thing, not separate pieces. Professor Williams felt a chill run down her spine. This 8-year-old had just articulated something it had taken her decades to understand. That's profound, Maya. Many musicians spend their whole lives trying to achieve that integrated understanding. You have it naturally. Linda watched from her chair, only half understanding the technical discussion but completely understanding that something special was happening. Her daughter wasn't just learning to play piano. She was learning to think about music in deep, complex ways. As the lesson continued, Professor Williams introduced Maya to music composition theory. She explained how composers developed themes, created variations, built tension and resolution. I want you to start composing more seriously, Professor Williams said. You have natural instincts for it, but I want to teach you the formal structures. Understanding form and structure will give you more tools to express your musical ideas. I'd like that, Maya said enthusiastically. I have lots of melodies in my head. Sometimes I wake up and there's a whole song just playing in my mind. That's your creative subconscious at work, Professor Williams explained. Many composers experience that. Keep a notebook by your bed. When you wake up with music in your head, write it down immediately, even just the melody line. We can develop it later. They worked for another 30 minutes on basic composition techniques. Professor Williams showed Maya how to develop a simple melody into a more complex piece, how to create harmonic progressions that supported the melody, how to structure a composition so it felt complete. Maya caught on quickly, as always. By the end of the session, she had written a short original piece, only about 30 seconds long, but it was musically coherent and actually quite beautiful. This is excellent for a first formal composition, Professor Williams said, genuinely impressed. Next week, I want you to expand this. Think about what comes next. Where does this melody want to go? As the lesson wound down, Professor Williams pulled out a calendar. I want to talk about your performance schedule. I've had several requests from concert venues wanting you to perform. I've been turning most of them down, but there's one I think you should consider. She handed Maya and Linda a flyer. It was for a young artist's showcase at a local community theater. Nothing fancy or high pressure, just an afternoon concert featuring promising young musicians from the area. This would be a good experience, Professor Williams explained. The audience is supportive and friendly. It's not competitive. Just a chance to share your music with people who appreciate it. Maya looked at the flyer, then at her mother. Can I do it? Linda smiled. If you want to, it's up to you. I want to, Maya said. But can I play my own composition? The one I'm writing? Professor Williams raised her eyebrows. You want to debut your own work? That's ambitious. But yes, I think that's a wonderful idea. It'll give you motivation to finish it properly. Over the next weeks, Maya threw herself into finishing her composition. She worked on it during her practice time at home, refined it during lessons with Professor Williams.